Welcome to my channel. Professor Nightshade invites you into the haunted underworld of the Paris Catacombs. Tonight we descend into a labyrinth of endless corridors, where walls of skulls and bones whisper tales of terror. Beneath the bustling streets of Paris lies a forgotten world, one steeped in mystery, darkness, and shadows that stretch far beyond the reach of light. Prepare yourself for chilling accounts of vanished explorers, cryptic markings left by unseen hands, and echoes that drift through the tunnels, defying explanation. Some say the spirits of the dead still wander these corridors. Others claim something far more sinister lurks in the depths. Do you dare step deeper into the unknown? Then, light your torches and stay close, because once we enter, there may be no turning back. Welcome to the shadows, where nightmares come alive. Secret ritual. Alex adjusted the camera strapped to his chest and took a deep breath, his voice steady, but tinged with excitement. All right, guys. Welcome back to Uncharted Truths. Tonight, we're taking you where no one else dares to go, into the restricted zones of the Paris Catacombs. This is the stuff of nightmares, legends, and conspiracy theories. But we're here to prove one thing: none of it is real. He grinned at the lens, his face lit by the dim beam of his headlamp. Behind him, Maya rolled her eyes, muttering, "Or we're here to prove that Alex has no sense of self-preservation." "Come on, Maya. You agreed to this," Liam said, tossing her a flashlight. His tattooed arms flexed as he zipped up his jacket against the damp chill of late autumn. "Think of the views we're going to get when people see us debunking this crap." Ethan stood slightly apart, fiddling with the settings on his infrared camera. His hands trembled just enough for Maya to notice. "You good?" she asked. "Yeah, just trying to make sure I don't miss anything." He forced a smile, but his eyes darted nervously toward the gaping tunnel ahead. The entrance to the restricted area of the catacombs was a narrow opening, half hidden behind broken stones and rusted metal bars bent aside. Years of graffiti layered the walls, but beneath the colorful paint were faint carvings, circles, crosses, and symbols none of them recognized. Alex ran a hand over the stone. "Looks old," he said, "but it's probably just leftover junk from before they sealed this area off." Maya knelt to examine one of the symbols, sketching it quickly in her journal. "Or it's something we shouldn't mess with." Liam snorted. "What? You think it's cursed?" "No," she shot back. "I think it's something people believed in enough to carve into solid rock. Doesn't mean it works, but it means they thought it did." Ethan cleared his throat. "Guys, we're wasting battery." "Right." Alex stepped through first, and one by one they followed. The tunnel swallowed them immediately, cutting off most of the sounds from the surface. The air was thick, damp and cold, with a faint, musty scent that clung to their clothes. Water dripped somewhere out of sight, each drop echoing too loud. Maya's flashlight swept over the walls, revealing bones stacked neatly behind rusted grates. Skulls stared out from the piles, hollow and grinning. "Jesus," Liam muttered. "You ever wonder if they put these here as a joke?" "They're real," Maya said. "Thousands of bodies were moved down here when the cemeteries overflowed." Ethan paused to film the scene, whispering to himself as he narrated. First room, wall-to-wall bones, skulls stacked like bricks. No signs of disturbance yet. "Let's keep moving," Alex said. The tunnels grew narrower, the ceiling lower. They had to crouch in places, scraping their backpacks against stone. The deeper they went, the colder it became, and the air seemed heavier. It was Ethan who noticed it for certain. Correct. Hasiferstam, They said all stopped. The silence was deafening. What? Alex asked. Ethan shook his head. I thought... Never mind. But he stayed closer to Maya after that, and his camera light trembled as he moved. They found the first signs of something unusual after another 30 minutes of exploring. A room opened up ahead, larger than the others, with a vaulted ceiling blackened by soot. Candles, melted to jagged stubs, lined the edges of the chamber. Symbols covered the walls, painted in faded red. Blood? Liam asked, stepping closer. Maya examined it and shook her head. Number 2 old. Probably ochre or something. But it looks fresh. Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. Like someone's been adding to it. They all turned to look at him. Come on, man, Liam said, trying to laugh. Don't freak yourself out. But even he didn't sound convinced. Alex broke the tension. Let's keep going. We're getting good footage. Whatever this is, it's definitely staged. The tunnel beyond the chamber twisted sharply, narrowing to the point where they had to move single file. Maya kept checking her journal against their map, frowning. This isn't right, she said. We should have hit another open chamber by now. Alex turned back to look at her. Maybe the map's wrong. Or maybe someone didn't want us to find our way back, Ethan muttered. No one's messing with the tunnels, Alex said, firmly. They're just old. Stay focused. The feeling of being watched started soon after. Ethan kept glancing over his shoulder, and even Liam stopped joking. The flicker of shadows from their lights seemed too sharp, too sudden. At one point, Ethan jerked his camera toward a side tunnel. There! They all froze, turning their lights toward the darkness. Nothing, Alex exhaled. You're scaring yourself. Let's keep moving. But no one argued when he picked up the pace. As they reached the next chamber, the tension thickened. It was smaller than the others, but the floor was covered in dirt, and symbols drawn into it. Circles within circles. Bones arranged in patterns. Candles, some still flickering faintly. Maya crouched, tracing the symbols in her notebook. These aren't random. What do they mean? Ethan asked. She shook her head. I don't know. But this... She gestured to the patterns. It wasn't just for show. Liam kicked one of the bones aside, sending it skittering across the floor. Don't! Maya started, but it was too late. The sound of the bone echoed unnaturally, stretching longer than it should. Somewhere in the tunnels, a faint whisper drifted toward them. Ethan dropped his camera, and the lights began to flicker. Ethan's flashlight flickered and went dark. Shit! No! 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 He smacked it against his palm, but it refused to turn back on. The glow from the camera lens remained steady, though its field of vision felt narrower, as if the shadows were pressing closer. Calm down, Alex ordered, stepping into the center of the chamber. His own light swept over the dirt floor and scattered bones. We're fine. It's probably moisture messing with the batteries. But Maya didn't look convinced. Her gaze lingered on the symbols etched into the ground. I think we need to leave. Now. Liam snorted, but there was no humor in it. We just got here. No, she's right. Ethan's voice wavered. This isn't right. That whisper. Did you hear it? It was an echo, Liam said, though his voice lacked its usual bravado. Let's just... A sudden crash cut him off. They spun toward the sound, their lights converging on a pile of bones that had collapsed from one of the stacked walls. Skulls rolled across the floor, scattering like dice. Maya stepped back, clutching her journal. Echoes don't move things. Probably a rat, Alex said. But even he didn't seem convinced. He pointed toward the tunnel opposite them. We keep going. We document what we can. And then we leave. No splitting up. They pressed forward, the tunnel squeezing around them. The air grew thicker, and the dripping water sounded louder, almost rhythmic, like footsteps. The next chamber was worse. Bones weren't just stacked here, they were arranged. Spirals radiated out from the center, interwoven with lines of black ash. A crude altar stood against the far wall, built from fractured skulls and femurs. On top of it, a rusted knife gleamed faintly in the light. "Okay," Ethan said, backing away. Nope. We're done." Maya turned to Alex. "You still think this is staged?" Alex didn't answer. He stepped toward the altar, his light catching more symbols etched into the stone. They were jagged, almost angry, and still sharp despite the decay of time. He knelt to examine them, running his fingers lightly over the grooves. The stone felt cold. Too cold. "Alex," Maya's voice trembled. "Just a second," he said, pulling out his camera. "This is incredible. Someone had to build this, but how did it stay intact for this long?" "That's what you care about?" Liam snapped. He kicked one of the spirals, scattering bones. "It's just junk. People messing around, trying to scare idiots like us." The echo came again, louder this time. Maya grabbed Liam's arm. "Don't do that." "Relax." The bones shifted, not from his kick, but as if something beneath them had stirred. Ethan dropped his camera, and the light from it spun wildly across the room, catching glimpses of movement, shadows that shouldn't have been there. Then the whispers started again. They ran. The narrow tunnels made it impossible to move fast, but panic drove them forward. Alex led the way, gripping the camera tightly as the red symbols flickered past. Ethan stumbled behind him, breathing hard. Maya's flashlight beam bobbed wildly, and Liam brought up the rear, cursing under his breath. "Stop!" Maya yelled suddenly. They skidded to a halt at a fork in the passage. The map showed a straight path, but now there were two. "Which way?" Alex demanded. Maya flipped through her journal, but the pages made no sense. Symbols replaced her sketches, bleeding through the paper. "I don't know." "Pick one," Liam shouted. Alex chose the left, and they plunged deeper. The walls seemed closer now, the air heavier. Ethan tripped and fell, his camera clattering across the floor. When he grabbed it, he froze. "What the hell?" The screen displayed something behind them, a tall, indistinct shape that melted into the shadows. It moved, stretching closer. "Run!" Ethan screamed. The tunnels twisted unnaturally, bending in ways that shouldn't have been possible. They hit dead ends and turned back, retracing their steps only to find new paths. Time blurred. They stumbled into another chamber, smaller this time. The walls were covered in carvings, names, dates. Maya pointed, her voice trembling. "That's today's date!" Beneath it were 4 names. Their names. "No," Alex whispered. "Someone's messing with us," Liam said, but the bravado was gone. Ethan turned his camera toward the wall, and the screen glitched. The image broke apart into static, then flickered back, revealing shapes in the shadows. Tall. Watching. Liam grabbed Alex's shoulder. "We have to move." But before they could, the bones shifted again. This time, they didn't stop. The chamber collapsed into chaos. Candles ignited spontaneously, their flames twisting unnaturally. The shadows moved, reaching. Maya screamed as something brushed past her, yanking at her hair. Ethan dropped his gear, backing against the wall. Liam lunged for the altar and kicked it over, scattering bones. The whispers became screams. Alex grabbed Maya's arm, dragging her toward the exit. "Go! Go now!" Ethan froze. "The camera. I need—" "Leave it!" Alex roared. Liam hesitated, turning back. "No! We have to—" The shadows surged, and Liam was yanked backward. His scream echoed through the chamber, cut short as the darkness swallowed him. They ran blindly. The tunnels twisted and stretched, but Alex kept pushing forward, pulling Maya and Ethan with him. They didn't stop until the light returned, dim and weak, but real. The passage opened, and the oppressive weight lifted. Only then did they collapse to the ground, gasping for air. "Liam," Ethan whispered. Maya hugged her knees, shaking. "We left him." Alex sat back against the wall, staring at the tunnel's entrance. The shadows within seemed alive, shifting and flickering even in the distance. "No," he said softly. "We didn't leave him. It took him." The silence that followed Liam's disappearance was heavier than the air in the tunnels. Maya's breaths came in short gasps, her flashlight trembling as she pointed it toward the darkness where he had vanished. "We have to go back." Ethan's voice cracked. He was still gripping his camera, though the lens was shattered. "We can't just leave him." "He's gone," Alex said, his voice hollow. "You saw it. Whatever's down here, it took him." Maya shook her head. "Number. We don't know that. He could still be alive." Alex turned to her, eyes sharp. "And what happens when we go back? Do you think it'll stop at Liam? You want to end up like him?" "Stop!" Ethan shouted, his voice echoing through the tunnels. Both Alex and Maya flinched. "We're wasting time. If we don't find a way out, none of us are getting out of here." Alex took a deep breath and nodded. "He's right. We'll keep moving. We'll come back with help. But we have to get out first." Maya didn't argue. She shut her journal, hugging it to her chest as they started forward again. The tunnels twisted like veins, closing in tighter as they moved. The echoes of their footsteps seemed too loud, and no one spoke. Every scrape of stone or shift in the shadows made Ethan flinch. Alex checked his watch, but the screen was blank. Dead. He gritted his teeth and shoved it back into his pocket. "Stop," Maya said suddenly. They froze. "What now?" Alex hissed. Maya knelt and brushed dirt away from the ground. Symbols emerged beneath the dust. Circles, spirals, and jagged lines. She paled. "These are different." "What do you mean different?" Ethan's voice shook. "They're newer," she whispered. "The edges are sharp, not worn. And these..." She pointed to the spirals. "They're unfinished." Alex felt his stomach drop. "Unfinished?" Maya looked up at him, fear written across her face. "Someone's still making them." They kept moving, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Ethan glanced over his shoulder constantly, his flashlight beam dancing across the walls. Twice he swore he saw something move, something tall and skeletal, but by the time Alex turned, it was gone. "This doesn't make sense," Maya said, flipping through her journal. "We should be near the entrance, but none of this matches the map." "It's the tunnels," Alex said. "They're screwing with us." "No," Ethan muttered. "Not the tunnels. Them." Maya stopped. "Them?" Ethan swallowed hard and raised his broken camera. "Look." He hit playback. The screen flickered with static before showing the footage of Liam's disappearance. The shadows shifted unnaturally, coiling around him as he screamed. Then the feed cut out. "Wait!" Maya reached for the camera, rewinding. The video froze on a frame. Liam's outstretched hand, and beyond him, something faint but visible. A figure. No, not one figure, several. Dark, faceless shapes with elongated limbs, blending into the shadows but watching. Waiting. Maya dropped the camera. "Oh my God!" The whispers returned. Soft at first, like a breeze carrying voices just out of reach, but they grew louder, closer, until the words pressed against their ears. "Names." Maya covered her ears and backed away. "Stop it! Make it stop!" Ethan staggered against the wall, his eyes wide. "They're saying our names!" Alex grabbed them both, pulling them forward. "Don't! Listen!" The whispers followed. They reached another chamber, larger this time, but not empty. A second altar stood in the center, surrounded by spirals of bones and ash, but this one was different. Their names were carved into the stone. Ethan staggered back, dropping his flashlight. "Number no. This can't..." Maya knelt, her hands trembling as she traced the carvings. "It's a ritual. What kind of ritual? Alex demanded. She shook her head. A sacrifice. The symbols. They're protective, but they can't stop what's down here. They only contain it, and it needs something to finish the ritual. What does it need? Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. Maya looked up at him, tears streaking her face. Blood. Panic set in. Ethan scrambled away from the altar. No, I'm not. The shadows surged. A wave of cold air swept through the chamber, snuffing out the candles. Ethan screamed, his light flaring wildly as the shapes closed in. Ethan! Alex lunged for him, but Ethan bolted. Don't! Maya shouted. Ethan didn't stop. He ran toward the tunnels, his light bouncing erratically as he vanished into the dark. A moment later, his scream cut through the silence. Then nothing. Alex turned to Maya. We have to finish it. What? She looked at him horrified. The ritual. We have to finish it. Stop whatever this is. How? We don't even know what we're doing. We don't have a choice. Maya hesitated, her eyes darting to the altar. What if it's a trick? What if finishing it only makes it stronger? Alex grabbed her shoulders. And what if it doesn't? Do you want to end up like Liam and Ethan? Tears filled her eyes, but she nodded. What do we do? Alex pulled out the knife from the altar, its edge stained and rusted. He gritted his teeth and sliced his palm, letting the blood drip onto the stone. The room trembled. The shadows recoiled, hissing like steam escaping a vent. The whispers grew louder, then sharper, angry, but the bones began to fall. The spirals collapsed. Alex turned to Maya. We need more. She stared at the knife. I can't. You have to. Her hand shook as she took the blade and pressed it to her skin. Blood welled and fell onto the altar. The ground shuddered, and the shadows screamed. The shadows writhed as Maya's blood struck the altar. The air thickened, vibrating with the sound of unseen voices, a chorus of screams and whispers that bled into one another. Alex gripped Maya's wrist, pulling her back from the altar as the symbols began to glow faintly, pulsing with a sickly red light. Did it work? Maya gasped, clutching her bleeding hand. The whispers stopped. For the first time since they'd entered the tunnels, the silence felt oppressive, as though it were waiting for something to break it. Alex's voice came out hoarse. I don't know. The light from their flashlights flickered, and the shadows in the corners of the chamber seemed to deepen. Then came the sound. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Maya grabbed Alex's arm. And still here. No. Alex turned toward the tunnel, raising his light. Something else is. A figure emerged. It was Liam. His face was pale, streaked with dirt and blood, and his eyes were wide. Too wide. Reflecting the flickering light like an animal's. He stepped toward them, but his movements were wrong, jerky and unnatural. Liam? Maya's voice cracked. He didn't respond. Liam, it's us! Alex shouted. Liam stopped, his head tilting slightly. Then he opened his mouth. The sound that came out wasn't human. Alex staggered back. That's not him! Maya screamed as Liam lunged. Alex pushed her aside and swung the rusted knife, the blade slicing through Liam's arm. The figure didn't even flinch. Instead, it grabbed Alex, slamming him against the altar with inhuman strength. Run! Alex shouted. Maya hesitated only for a moment before turning and fleeing into the tunnels. The passageways twisted, folding in on themselves, but Maya didn't stop. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs threatened to give out. Behind her, the whispers returned. She stumbled into another chamber, smaller and empty, save for more symbols carved into the walls. Her flashlight caught something in the corner, a mirror, cracked and smeared with ash. Maya moved closer, drawn despite herself. The reflection showed her face, pale and streaked with sweat. But there was something else behind her, a shape, tall and thin, its limbs too long. She spun around, nothing. But when she looked back at the mirror, the figure was closer. The whispers grew louder. No! She whispered, backing away. No! 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 The mirror shattered. Somewhere in the distance, Alex's voice echoed. Maya! She ran toward the sound, her flashlight beam dancing wildly across the walls. When she found him, he was slumped against the wall, blood soaking his shirt. The knife was gone, and Liam's body, if it had ever really been Liam, was nowhere to be seen. Alex! She dropped to her knees beside him, his eyes fluttered open. You made it. You're hurt, she said, pressing her hand against the wound. It's too late. He winced. You have to keep going. No. Tears filled her eyes. I'm not leaving you. You have to. He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. Finish the ritual. I don't know how. He pressed something into her hand, the journal stained with blood. It's all in here, he said. You have to end it. Maya shook her head, but Alex's grip loosened, his hand falling away. The light in his eyes faded. Maya didn't remember leaving the tunnels. She only remembered the blood on her hands, the weight of the journal, and the whispers that seemed to follow her long after she emerged into the cold night air. The authorities didn't believe her story. They searched the catacombs but found nothing. No altars, no symbols, and no sign of Alex, Liam, or Ethan. They ruled it an accident, a cave-in. Maya stopped talking to the police after that. She stopped talking to anyone. But the whispers never stopped. Days later, Maya sat alone in her apartment, flipping through the journal. The symbols stared back at her, taunting her with their jagged lines and spirals. She hadn't been able to finish the ritual, and now it was too late. The whispers were louder than ever. They filled the room, pressing against her ears until she couldn't think. She looked at the knife on the table, and the journal said there were 2 ways to finish the ritual. One was blood, enough blood to bind the entities. The other was sacrifice. Maya reached for the knife. 2 weeks later, Maya's neighbors reported a foul smell coming from her apartment. When the police broke down the door, they found her body surrounded by symbols drawn in blood. The journal lay open beside her, its pages filled with incoherent scribbles. The police ruled it a suicide. But the footage recovered from Ethan's camera told a different story. The final frames showed Maya in the catacombs, staring at the altar. Behind her, the shadows moved, stretching, twisting, before the feed cut to black. The footage was never released to the public, but copies of it began circulating online, shared in obscure forums and dark web threads. No one knows who uploaded it. And no one can explain the whispers heard faintly in the background. The Lost Guide. Jean-Pierre Arnaud had been the city's most trusted guide through the labyrinthine catacombs, a man whose weathered voice could turn cold stone walls into tales of forgotten lives. He knew every turn and hidden chamber beneath the ancient streets, his lantern always steady, his steps deliberate. That is, until the night he vanished. The reports came swiftly. A tour cut short, an empty tunnel, and no trace of the man who had led countless explorers through the depths below. For 3 weeks, search teams combed the underground passages. They found nothing but discarded candles, old bones, and the gnawing silence of the catacombs. Then, as abruptly as he had disappeared, Jean-Pierre returned, ragged, hollow-eyed, and speaking in whispers that no one could decipher. Marie Durand leaned back in her creaking chair, rereading the reports for the 4th time. The dim light of her desk lamp struggled against the encroaching evening shadows in her cluttered apartment. Faded photographs of the catacombs and sketches of symbols were scattered across the table. A half-empty mug of coffee sat beside her recorder, the red light blinking. He walked into the police station, Marie, Alex Moreau said, pacing near the window. Just sat down in the lobby, covered in dirt, muttering about tunnels no one's mapped. The medics couldn't get anything coherent out of him. Marie pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose, eyes narrowing. They'll dismiss him as delusional. You saw the photos. Those carvings aren't from any tour route. She jabbed a finger at one grainy image, a series of spirals and jagged lines etched into stone, eerily precise. Alex crossed his arms. And you think he found some ancient, cursed passage? Come on, Marie. He was probably trapped and hallucinating. People get lost down there all the time. Not Jean-Pierre. She shook her head. He wouldn't have panicked. Something else happened. Alex's skepticism was familiar, grounding even, but Marie had seen too many loose ends to let it go. She had spent years digging into forgotten histories and urban legends. Her obsession with exposing the truth, often placing her at odds with both editors and friends, and yet this story, the guide who disappeared and returned broken, felt different. Personal. Look, Alex said, softening. I'll come with you, but we stick to mapped tunnels, no improvising. Marie pretended to agree, knowing full well she wouldn't stop until she uncovered the truth. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and old linens. Jean-Pierre lay curled in his bed, his hollow cheeks twitching with every creak of the building's foundation. Marie lingered in the doorway, notebook in hand, before stepping inside. Jean-Pierre, she began gently, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. I'm Marie Durand. I'm a journalist, and I want to help you. His eyes flickered to hers, wide and wild. He clutched a folded scrap of paper in his trembling hands. I saw them, he rasped. Marie's pulse quickened. Saw who? The Watchers. They're always there, watching the stone. His voice cracked, and he shoved the paper into her hand. Don't go back. They don't like it when you see too much. She unfolded the paper, revealing jagged sketches of the symbols she had already studied. But this time there was more. Shapes resembling human figures, their eyes hollowed out, their mouths twisted in silent screams. Before she could ask another question, Jean-Pierre curled up, his body shaking violently. A nurse rushed in, motioning for Marie to leave. Outside, Alex waited, leaning against the wall. How'd it go? Marie stared at the paper in her hands. We're going in tomorrow. The entrance to the catacombs was less than inviting. Rusted gates barred the way, and faded warnings in multiple languages warned trespassers of fines and imprisonment. Marie's press badge got them past the guards, though Alex's protests hadn't stopped since they left the hospital. You saw him, Marie. He's out of his mind, and if these symbols are what I think they are, this could just be some ancient cult site. Dangerous people. People we don't need to mess with. Marie ignored him, adjusting her flashlight. You don't have to come, he scoffed. Like hell I'm leaving you down there alone. The first descent was familiar, narrow steps spiraling into damp darkness. Marie focused on her breathing, suppressing the claustrophobia clawing at her ribs. The tunnels felt alive, their walls sweating and closing in. Alex's light danced ahead, steady but small against the overwhelming blackquay. They followed Pierre's map, turning at unmarked intersections and passing walls carved with dates and names long forgotten. It wasn't until they reached the first set of symbols that Marie felt it, a shift in the air, thick and oppressive. Did you feel that? Alex asked, stopping beside her. Marie nodded. The symbols on the walls seemed to hum, their patterns dizzying under the flashlight's beam. Let's keep moving, she said. But her voice trembled. Neither of them noticed the faint echo of footsteps behind them. Marie pressed her palm against the damp wall, steadying herself as the tunnel twisted into another tight bend. The stone felt unnervingly warm, like skin. She withdrew her hand quickly, wiping the moisture on her jeans. Alex scanned the map under the beam of his flashlight. According to this, we should be near a chamber. It's marked, but there's no label. Marie leaned in. Jean-Pierre must have drawn it after his disappearance. Look at the edges. It's sketched in charcoal, not ink. Alex frowned. So, we're following the ramblings of a madman deeper into a maze no one's mapped? Great. Marie ignored him, turning her focus back to the tunnel. The symbols were growing more elaborate. Intertwined spirals and jagged lines that looked almost like eyes staring from the stone. Her flashlight flickered, and she smacked it against her palm. "Batteries are fine," Alex said, testing his own light. "Could be interference. Minerals in the rock. Maybe. Or something else." Marie's voice dropped. A sound echoed from deeper in the tunnel, soft, like fabric brushing stone. Both froze. "Wind?" Alex offered, though his voice lacked confidence. Marie shook her head. "No airflow down here." She stepped forward, gripping the flashlight so tightly her knuckles turned white. The sound came again, closer this time. Alex moved ahead of her. "Stay behind me." The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, and Marie's breath caught. Bones, scattered and broken, covered the floor like a carpet. Human bones, skulls rested against walls, their empty sockets gazing outward. "Jesus Christ," Alex muttered, sweeping his light across the room. Marie crouched beside a cluster of bones, brushing aside debris to reveal carvings on the floor. The symbols mirrored those on the walls, but these were larger and more intricate. This wasn't some burial chamber, she whispered. "It's ceremonial." Alex stepped back, nearly tripping over a ribcage. "I don't like this. We need to go." "Not yet." Marie's voice was sharp. She reached into her bag, pulling out Jean-Pierre's drawing. She laid it beside the carvings, aligning the patterns. "It's a match." A sudden gust of cold air blew through the chamber, and their lights sputtered. The shadows danced unnaturally, stretching and twisting as if alive. "Marie!" Alex grabbed her arm. "We're leaving. Now!" But before they could move, the shadows congealed. A shape formed against the far wall, tall and thin, with elongated limbs and hollow eyes. It didn't move, yet Marie felt its gaze pin her in place. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts. "Alex!" He stepped forward, waving his light. The shape dissolved, and the room was still again. "Trick of the light," Alex said, though his voice shook. Marie swallowed hard, forcing herself to look away from the walls. "Let's keep moving. We're close." The next passage felt narrower, as though the walls pressed inward. Marie's claustrophobia clawed at her thoughts, but she pushed it down, focusing on the sound of their footsteps. "This place doesn't feel right," Alex muttered. "Just a little farther." Marie traced the symbols with her fingers as they walked. They felt deeper now, freshly carved. "Someone's been here recently." "Who?" Marie didn't answer. She felt it before she saw it. The chamber. Massive, domed, and lined with columns etched in symbols. At its center stood a stone altar, slick with something dark. "Oh, God," Alex said, covering his mouth. This is wrong." Marie stepped closer, transfixed. Her flashlight caught movement, carvings shifting, like the stone was breathing. "Marie, don't!" A sudden scream tore through the chamber, and Alex's light spun wildly. "Alex!" Marie shouted, but his flashlight dropped, clattering to the floor. Darkness swallowed her. Marie's pulse thundered in her ears as the darkness closed in. She scrambled for Alex's flashlight, her trembling fingers brushing against cold stone and brittle bones. The chamber seemed to pulse, as if the walls themselves were alive and breathing. "Alex!" Her voice echoed, bouncing back at her in warped, distorted tones. She forced the flashlight beam upward, scanning the chamber. The symbols seemed to ripple under the light, twisting like roots burrowing deeper into the stone. The altar in the center was empty, yet the slick surface gleamed, reflecting her trembling hand. Marie's breath hitched as she noticed the faint drag marks leading away from the altar, disappearing into a smaller tunnel at the far end of the chamber. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but Alex's name lingered on her lips, and she forced herself to move. She stepped carefully, her boots crunching on scattered bones as the cymbals pulsed with an almost rhythmic cadence. Each step felt heavier, like the ground itself was trying to hold her in place. The tunnel narrowed, forcing her to crouch as she followed the faint trail. Her flashlight flickered again, and panic clawed at her chest. Not now. She slapped the side of the flashlight, and the beam steadied just in time to illuminate a figure slumped against the wall ahead. Alex! She rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside him. He was breathing, but barely conscious. His face pale and drenched in sweat. Deep scratches marred his arms as though he'd clawed at himself in desperation. Alex, wake up. She shook him, and his eyes fluttered open, unfocused. Marie? His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. Don't look at them. Who? Alex, what happened? But his gaze drifted past her, and his body tensed. Marie turned slowly, the beam of her flashlight trembling, as it revealed the far end of the tunnel. The walls there were covered in carvings, figures bent in worship before something vast and inhuman. The central figure had elongated limbs, hollow eyes, and jagged lines radiating from its head like a crown. The Pope. Jean-Pierre's words echoed in her mind. They're always watching. A low sound rose in the tunnel, like distant whispers merging into a chant. Shadows stirred at the edges of the light. Marie pulled Alex to his feet. We have to move. Now. He stumbled, leaning heavily against her as they retraced their steps. The chanting grew louder, pressing against her ears, and the shadows shifted faster, flanking them. We're not alone, Alex rasped. Marie didn't answer. She focused on the light, keeping it steady as they reached the chamber again. But something had changed. The symbols glowed faintly, their lines pulsating in sync with the chanting. The altar was no longer empty. A figure lay sprawled across it. Jean-Pierre. God, Marie breathed. No! His eyes snapped open, milky and wide, and his body convulsed. Help me, he rasped. But his voice was layered, distorted, as if others were speaking through him. His hands clawed at the stone, his nails splitting as he tried to rise. Marie took a step forward, but Alex yanked her back. It's not him. The symbols flared, blinding her for a moment, and when her vision cleared, Jean-Pierre was gone. Only his blood remained, spreading outward in intricate patterns. The whispers turned into guttural moans, and the shadows took shape. Marie screamed as elongated limbs emerged, their movements unnatural and jerky. Go! Alex shouted, shoving her toward the exit. Marie ran, her lungs burning and her thoughts unraveling. Alex's footsteps pounded behind her, but as she reached the tunnel, his cries rang out. Marie! She turned just in time to see him dragged back into the chamber. His flashlight fell to the ground, its beam spinning wildly before shattering. Alex! She lunged forward, but a force like icy fingers gripped her, pushing her back. The symbols on the walls flared, and the shadows surged, forcing her to retreat. Tears blurred her vision as she turned and ran, Alex's screams echoing behind her until they abruptly stopped. The tunnels twisted, and Marie's thoughts grew hazy. She didn't know how long she had been running, but her legs burned, and her flashlight was dimming. Finally, she stumbled into a narrow passage and collapsed, her back against the wall. The silence was deafening. She gripped her recorder, her fingers shaking as she hit the button. This is Marie Durand. I don't know how much time I have, but I need to document this. The symbols, the shadows, they're real. Jean-Pierre wasn't crazy. He saw something down here. And now Alex, her voice broke. They're still here, watching, waiting. I don't know if I can get out. She stopped the recording and pressed her forehead to the cold stone. Her flashlight flickered and died, leaving her in absolute darkness. The whispers returned. Marie's breathing slowed as the darkness thickened around her. The whispers ebbed and flowed, rising like a tide and fading just before they overwhelmed her. She pressed her back harder against the wall, feeling the cold stone bite through her jacket. She had lost track of time. The recorder felt heavy in her hand, the only thing grounding her in reality. "Focus," she whispered, but her voice barely carried in the pressing dark. She forced herself to move, groping along the walls as the symbols carved into the stone scraped against her fingertips. They burned faintly, leaving an unsettling warmth on her skin. She didn't stop to think about it. She couldn't. The tunnel narrowed, forcing her to crawl. Her knees scraped against jagged rocks, and the sound of her own movements grew deafening. The whispers, though softer, seemed to follow. Then she felt it. A breeze, faint but real. A sob broke from her lips as she scrambled forward, dragging herself through the suffocating passage until she tumbled into an open chamber. Her flashlight flared to life one final time, illuminating the rough stone walls. She recognized the space. It was near the entrance. Relief coursed through her, but the feeling died the moment she saw the symbols. They were carved deeper here, sharper and more chaotic, like claw marks. Worse, they were fresh. And then she saw the figure. Alex stood in the corner, his back to her, his shoulders trembling. "Alex!" Marie stumbled to her feet. "You're alive!" He didn't turn. "Alex?" Her voice faltered. Slowly he turned his head just enough for her to see the pale reflection of his eyes. Wide, unblinking, and hollow. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Instead, the whispers rose again, louder this time, pouring from his mouth like a living thing. Marie staggered back, her heart pounding. "No," she said, shaking her head. You're not him." He took a step forward, his movements stiff and unnatural. Marie turned and ran. The light at the end of the tunnel was blinding as she emerged from the catacombs, collapsing onto the cold pavement outside the entrance. The guards shouted, rushing to her, but their voices sounded distant. The whispers didn't stop. 2 weeks later, Marie sat at her desk, staring at her laptop screen. Her article had gone viral. Sensationalized headlines about ancient cults, hallucinations, and rituals beneath the city. But no one believed her. They called it fiction, a publicity stunt. Even Alex's disappearance was dismissed as an unrelated tragedy. Search teams scoured the tunnels, but no trace of him, or Jean-Pierre, was ever found. Marie knew better. She reached for her coffee only to knock it over. It spilled across her notes, soaking the edges of the sketches she had copied from the catacombs. The ink bled, forming shapes that looked too deliberate to be accidental. Her hands trembled. The symbols had followed her. She glanced toward the window, and her breath caught. Faint, just beyond the glass, shadows shifted. Long, thin shapes stretched unnaturally across the street, their movements echoing the horrors she had left behind. Marie staggered back, grabbing her phone to record the scene, but when she looked again, the shadows were gone. Still, she felt them, watching. Her skin prickled, and she pulled back her sleeve. The faint outlines of the carvings marked her forearm. The shapes burned into her flesh like scars. The whispers began again, faint but unmistakable. Marie clutched the recorder. "This is Marie Durand," she said, her voice shaking. "I thought I escaped, but I was wrong." The whispers grew louder. The Black Tunnel. Urban legends have a way of rooting themselves in the forgotten corners of a city's past, whispered through generations until they transform into something more than just stories. Beneath the cobblestone streets and crumbling facades of an unnamed European city, the catacombs stretched like veins through the earth. A maze of bones, darkness, and secrets. Among the many tales, one stood out: the legend of the Black Tunnel. They said it was unmarked on any map, hidden beyond collapsed chambers and narrow crawlspaces. Those who claimed to have found it never emerged to tell their story, leaving only scattered belongings and scratched walls as evidence of their fate. The city officials denied its existence, calling it a fabrication born of overactive imaginations and urban myths. But for Ethan Carter, the legend was an opportunity. "People will believe anything, but this one's different," Ethan said, slinging his camera bag over his shoulder. The dim light of their basement workspace flickered as Ryan adjusted the straps of his backpack. "I've done the research, and the tunnel has to be there. If we find it, this could be the biggest discovery since those Paris catacomb videos went viral." Ryan hesitated, chewing his lip as he fidgeted with a flashlight. "Or we end up like those other idiots who didn't make it back." Ethan shot his younger brother a sharp look, but softened when he saw the tension in Ryan's eyes. "We'll be fine. We've got maps, cameras, and gear. And we're not amateurs." He gestured to the table cluttered with headlamps, spare batteries, climbing ropes, and Ryan's collection of multi-tools. "We're prepared." "Prepared for what exactly?" Ryan muttered, but he followed his brother toward the stairwell. The descent into the catacombs began with an old service tunnel, rusted iron gates pried open long ago by vandals. The air grew heavier as they went deeper, their footsteps echoing against stone walls damp with condensation, stale air mixed with the faint scent of decay. Ryan tried not to look too closely at the scattered bones, piled in alcoves, remnants of the forgotten dead who had been buried here centuries ago. Ethan led confidently, his camera already recording. "Look at this structure," he said, running a hand along the ancient carvings etched into the wall. "Pre-Roman, maybe older. It's practically begging to be studied." Ryan's flashlight beam darted nervously, catching the occasional glint of moisture or fragments of broken pottery. "Or maybe it's begging to be left alone." "Come on, don't start with that," Ethan replied, pushing forward. The tunnels twisted and branched in directions their maps didn't account for. More than once, Ryan had to stop and double-check their route, marking chalk arrows on the walls to track their path. The deeper they went, the stranger the carvings became, shapes that didn't match any known symbols, spirals and sharp angles that seemed to hum faintly when touched. "You hear that?" Ryan asked, suddenly halting. Ethan paused, listening. "Hear what?" "That dripping sound." "It's probably groundwater," Ethan said, but his voice lacked conviction. The noise was irregular, sharp, like the tapping of nails against stone. They pressed on, though Ryan's footsteps grew slower and heavier. The air seemed thicker now, pressing against their lungs. When Ethan finally stopped, it was in front of a narrow gap between two collapsed walls. Dust coated the floor, undisturbed by footprints. "This could be it," he whispered. Ryan peered through the gap. It looked darker than the rest of the tunnels, as though the light refused to touch it. His stomach tightened. "Maybe we should turn back." Ethan gave him a look, but didn't argue. Instead, he set the camera on a tripod and focused it on the opening. "We came all this way. Just a quick look." The beam of Ryan's flashlight trembled as it illuminated the passage. Beyond the gap, the walls curved inward, narrowing until they vanished into shadow. A faint draft wafted through the opening, carrying a scent that turned Ryan's stomach, damp earth and something metallic, like blood. "Ethan, stay close," Ethan said, stepping through. Ryan swallowed his fear and followed. The darkness welcomed them like an open mouth. The black tunnel swallowed them. Ryan felt the weight of the stone pressing in, heavier with every step. The walls were too close. He could stretch out his arms and brush both sides. The air reeked of earth and decay, damp and heavy, clinging to his skin. Ethan walked ahead, his flashlight sweeping the walls. The carvings here were different, rougher, jagged, as if someone had scratched them in desperation. Strange symbols looped and spiraled, their meaning lost to time. "You see this?" Ethan crouched, his camera aimed at a symbol carved into the wall. It resembled an eye, elongated and sharp, but there was something wrong about it. The lines twisted unnaturally, making Ryan's head throb the longer he stared. Ryan looked away, focusing instead on the tunnel's uneven floor. He tried to steady his breathing. A faint sound broke the silence. Drip, drip, drip. "There it is again," Ryan said, voice low. "It's water," Ethan replied. But even he didn't sound convinced this time. The sound wasn't steady, like water finding its way through cracks. It was irregular, intentional. They moved deeper. Ethan's camera beeped softly. "What was that?" Ryan asked. "Battery's draining too fast." Ethan frowned, pulling the camera down to check. "It's already half dead." Ryan checked his watch. The digital numbers blinked erratically before settling. Ethan? What? My watch just jumped backward 2 minutes." Ethan raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Instead, he pushed forward, aiming his flashlight at the tunnel ahead. Shadows stretched and danced along the walls. The carvings grew stranger, more erratic. Now, they looked less like symbols, and more like desperate scratches, as if someone had clawed at the walls trying to get out. Ryan's stomach churned. "We shouldn't be here," he muttered. Ethan stopped. "Don't start that again." "I'm serious. Something's not right." Ethan turned, frustration in his eyes. "You think I don't know that? That's the point. This place isn't supposed to feel right. That's why no one's ever mapped it. Because people are too scared to finish what they start." Ryan flinched at his brother's tone but said nothing. He knew Ethan's pride wouldn't let him turn back. They pressed on. The passage twisted sharply, opening into a narrow chamber. Bones littered the ground, hundreds of them, old and brittle. Skulls stared blankly from corners, stacked in rows along the walls. Ryan gagged and covered his mouth. "What the hell is this?" Ethan knelt beside one of the piles, brushing away dust to reveal carvings etched into the skulls. "Markings," he whispered. "The same symbols as before." Ryan shined his flashlight toward the far side of the chamber. His beam landed on another tunnel, smaller, darker, and half collapsed. "That's it," Ethan said, standing. "No." Ryan stepped back. "Ethan, we need to leave. Look at this place." But Ethan didn't listen. He crossed the chamber, camera in hand. "Just a little farther." Ryan hesitated before following. As he stepped into the tunnel, his flashlight flickered. Then it went out. "Ethan, I see it," Ethan said, flipping his own light back on. Ryan smacked the flashlight against his palm until it sputtered back to life. The shadows seemed darker, now like they were watching. The tunnel narrowed even more, the air grew colder. Ryan felt it pressing against him, whispering through the cracks. A sound stopped them both, soft and distant. A voice. "Did you hear that?" Ryan froze. Ethan nodded, gripping the camera. The voice came again, a faint, distorted whisper. "Help!" Ryan's blood ran cold. "We need to go, now!" Ethan didn't move. He raised the camera, pointing it into the darkness. "Ethan, please." But Ethan stepped forward, his light cutting through the dark. The tunnel opened into another chamber, smaller than the last. Ethan's light swept across the walls, more bones, more symbols. And something else. A pile of tattered clothing, a helmet with a broken strap. Ryan's stomach dropped. "Is that—" Ethan knelt, brushing dirt away from the helmet. The camera attached to it blinked red, still recording. Someone been here?" Ethan whispered. Ryan's breath quickened. "And they didn't make it out." The voice came again, closer now. "Help me." Ryan stumbled back. "It's a trap. Ethan, we have to go." The flashlight in Ethan's hand flickered. The camera glitched, the screen showing static before returning to focus. Something moved in the shadows. Ryan's flashlight swept toward it. There was nothing there. The voice echoed again, louder. "Help me!" Ryan bolted. He turned and ran, his feet slamming against the uneven ground. "Ethan! Come on!" But Ethan didn't move. "Ryan, wait!" Ryan turned back just in time to see Ethan step deeper into the chamber. The tunnel shifted. The walls seemed to close. And then Ethan vanished. Ryan's scream echoed through the tunnels. "Ethan!" He lunged toward the spot where his brother had disappeared, but the tunnel rippled, as though the stone itself had twisted, and the opening was gone. In its place stood an unbroken wall of rock, damp and cold to the touch. "No, no, no!" Ryan pounded on the wall, his flashlight beam trembling as it bounced off the stone. "Ethan!" His cries faded into silence. Ryan staggered back, his breath shallow. He spun, flashlight beam darting through the darkness, searching for another way through. The shadows seemed alive, shifting just beyond the light. "Ethan!" He called again, but only the echoes answered. The camera. He fumbled with the helmet he'd found, shaking fingers, flipping open the screen. It still recorded, the red light blinking steadily. Ryan pressed play. The screen showed Ethan's view, dusty bones, dark symbols, the narrow tunnel, and then the moment it happened. The walls trembled, and the image fractured with static before clearing again. But the footage no longer showed the same tunnel. Instead, it revealed a cavern, its walls lined with jagged black stone. Shapes moved in the shadows. Thin, elongated figures that swayed unnaturally, their limbs too long. A faint whisper hummed beneath the static. Ryan's heart pounded as the camera view shifted, capturing Ethan turning to face the source of the sound. The screen blurred, colors bleeding together, before freezing on a single frame. A figure resembling Ethan, but wrong. Its face distorted, hollow-eyed and pale, mouth stretched too wide. Ryan dropped the camera. A soft scraping noise made him spin. The shadows moved. "Who's there?" Ryan demanded, though his voice cracked. No response. Only that scraping sound, closer now. He backed away, flashlight beam trembling. His thoughts raced. Ethan was alive. He had to be. Ryan just had to find him, but first he had to survive. He turned and ran. The tunnels twisted and narrowed. His flashlight flickered, plunging him into brief bursts of darkness. Ryan felt the walls closing in, his breath catching. As panic clawed at him, he tried to focus, tried to follow the chalk marks they'd made earlier, but they were gone. Scratches covered the walls instead. He stumbled, catching himself against the stone, and froze. A whisper brushed against his ear. "Ryan!" He spun, light sweeping over empty walls. No one was there. "Ryan?" The voice came again, fainter, but unmistakable. "Ethan!" Ryan's knees nearly gave out. "Ethan?" He followed the voice, moving deeper into the tunnels. The air grew colder, heavier. His flashlight dimmed, but he didn't stop. The whispering grew louder. It wasn't just Ethan anymore. It was layered, overlapping voices calling his name. He rounded a corner and froze. Bones lined the walls, stacked higher than before, but these weren't ancient remains. Some were fresh, still streaked with dark stains. And in the center of the chamber stood Ethan's camera, its red light blinking steadily. "Ethan!" Ryan lunged for the camera, snatching it up. He turned, and the light caught something just beyond the edge of the room. A figure crouched in the darkness. "Ethan?" Ryan's voice broke. The figure stepped forward, and Ryan's stomach twisted. It looked like Ethan, but his brother's face was pale and stretched, his eyes sunken and blackened. The voice that came from its mouth didn't sound human. It was layered, vibrating with something unnatural. "Ryan," it said. Ryan stumbled back, the camera slipping from his hands. "No, no!" The thing moved closer, its steps jerking unnaturally. Bones crunched beneath its feet. "Help me," it whispered again, but the voice was wrong, mocking, hollow. Ryan turned and ran. The tunnels seemed endless. The air pressed down on him, and the whispers grew louder. He could still hear Ethan's voice, but now it came from everywhere, bouncing off the walls, echoing in his head. He reached another chamber, but the walls shifted again, sealing the way he had come. No! Ryan pounded against the rock, but the stone was solid. A faint glow drew his attention. On the far side of the chamber, a narrow passage beckoned. He didn't think. He just ran. The tunnel curved sharply, and suddenly the floor dropped. Ryan fell, tumbling into darkness. When he hit the ground, pain exploded through his body. He groaned, forcing himself up. His flashlight was gone. Only the faint glow of the camera's red light remained, casting shadows that moved unnaturally across the walls. Then he saw it, a shape, tall and thin, emerging from the dark. Its limbs bent at wrong angles. Its head tilted as if studying him. Ryan scrambled backward, but the walls closed in again. The whispers rose to a deafening pitch, and then the light blinked out. Darkness swallowed Ryan. The whispers surrounded him, a chorus of voices that pressed into his ears, into his skull, until he wanted to scream. He scrambled backward, hands scraping against damp stone as the shape in front of him moved closer. "Stay back!" he yelled, though his voice broke into a choked sob. The figure stepped into the faint glow of the camera's blinking red light. It wore Ethan's face, pale, hollow, eyes black as tar. Its lips twitched, stretching into something like a smile. "Ryan." The voice vibrated with layers, too deep and too high all at once. Ryan shook his head. "You're not him." The thing tilted its head, the movement sharp and unnatural, like a marionette jerked by invisible strings. It took another step, bare feet scraping against the stone. "Help me." The words came out wrong, warped and fragmented like a recording played in reverse. Ryan fumbled for the camera, clutching it like a lifeline. The red light pulsed, but the screen showed only static. He pointed it at the creature, hoping it would do something. Anything, but the whispers only grew louder. Behind the thing, shadows shifted. More shapes emerged, limbs too long, faces half-formed, mouths gaping open in silent cries. Ryan couldn't breathe. "Please." The creature that wore Ethan's face took another step. Something inside Ryan broke. "No!" He lunged forward, slamming the camera into the creature's face. The impact shattered the lens, but the thing didn't flinch. It grabbed Ryan's wrist, its grip like iron. The whispers turned to screams. Ryan fought, kicking and clawing, but the shadows surged around him. Cold hands gripped his arms, his legs pulling him down. The world spun, and for a moment he thought he saw Ethan, his real brother, reaching out to him from the other side of the darkness. Then everything went still. 1 week later, the police recovered Ethan's camera. It was found abandoned near the entrance of the catacombs, its battery completely drained. The footage was corrupted, distorted by static and flickering lights, but parts of it remained intact. The video showed Ethan and Ryan descending into the tunnels, documenting their journey with steady confidence. It captured the carvings, the bones, and the moment they first entered the black tunnel. And then the glitches began. In the final minutes of the recording, Ethan's flashlight flickered as he turned toward the source of an eerie whisper. The screen blurred, and when it cleared, Ethan was gone. Ryan appeared next, panicked and shouting his brother's name. His flashlight shook, casting wild shadows. The whispers grew louder, overlapping until words became unintelligible. The last clear frame showed Ryan staring at something just outside the light. And then he screamed. The remaining footage was a mess of static and distorted images, fleeting glimpses of pale figures, elongated limbs, and hollow eyes. The final frame froze on a dark silhouette blocking the tunnel's exit. Its eyes gleamed faintly, reflecting the camera's light. The police concluded that the brothers had become lost and disoriented in the labyrinthine tunnels. A search party recovered their gear, but no bodies were ever found. Locals avoided the catacombs after that, But the legend of the Black Tunnel only grew. Some claimed to hear faint whispers near the entrance, voices calling for help. Others swore they saw shadows moving just out of sight, flickering in the corners of their vision. And a few, those brave or foolish enough to go looking, never came back at all.